which will provide a myriad of opportunities for us to collectively delve into the suite of amendments to the Domestic Violence Act 2023. Picture this: a legislative milestone passed in the House of Representatives on December 19, 2023, embraced by the Senate on December 21, 2023, and sealed with the Governor General's assent on December 27, 2023, officially in force since January 22, 2024. The amendments are indicative of the unwavering commitment of the government of Jamaica to tackle head-on the vexed issue of domestic violence, and by extension, all forms of gender-based violence within our society. They do not merely reflect a legal update. It's a promise, a shield that extends enhanced protection and legal recourse to the brave survivors who have weathered the turbulent storm of domestic violence. Behind this amendment lies a saga of persistence informed by the robust discussions which ensued during the numerous sittings of the Joint Select Committees of Parliament. I use this opportunity to extend highest commendation to the members who worked tirelessly to contribute to the reform of legislation that prioritizes the vulnerable members of our society. These changes echo the statistics that cannot be ignored. That is, 1 in 4 Jamaican women has faced intimate partner violence. Undoubtedly, the data requires a call to action for the protection of the most vulnerable in our society. Let us not forget that in the realm of domestic violence, the law remains inclusive, embracing all Jamaican citizens, regardless of their age, socioeconomic status, religion, or home address. We therefore stand united and resolute against this scourge of domestic violence. The legislative milestone not only signifies progress, but amplifies protection for victims and survivors of gender-based violence. The data indicates that the majority of victims and survivors of domestic violence are women and girls. To the extent that the Bureau of Gender Affairs functions effectively and efficiently as the focal point for the gender architecture in Jamaica, priority treatment is extended to our most vulnerable, including persons living with disabilities. Let me be clear, this legislation extends to all victims, irrespective of gender. Our commitment to gender equity and equality is evident in the establishment of safe spaces to provide ongoing support to victims and survivors of gender-based violence. A gender-based violence helpline was recently established in the Bureau of Gender Affairs, effective September 2023, to complement the range of services provided under the continuum of care for survivors. The continuum of care was launched in June 2022 to support the seamless coordination of a range of services. This includes psychosocial support and counseling, psychological first aid, warm referrals, safety planning, risk assessment, and a range of other services based on the contextual realities. The GBV Helpline Unit provides support for both female and male victims, with over 8,965 clients who have been supported to date. The National Strategic Action Plan for the Elimination of Gender-Based Violence in Jamaica paves the way for inclusive services, transcending societal stereotypes. Under the protection component of the NSAP GBV, Since October 2020, 81 clients, including underage children, were accommodated and provided with comprehensive and holistic support at the 2 government-operated and government-owned shelters in the northeast and eastern regions across the parishes in rural communities. The amendments to the Domestic Violence Act cater to the gender differential realities of men and women. They therefore expand the protective measures which are available to persons seeking protection from the ravages of domestic violence. Notable changes include the inclusion of the Children's Advocate in applying for protection orders and a widened scope for entities which can ramp up the support provided to persons who have increased in vulnerability. The amendment to Section 4 expands the range of prohibited conduct, emphasizing relinquishing firearms in the interest of safety. This reinforces the nexus between the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport as the lead ministries under the continuum of care for victims and survivors of gender-based violence. The penalties for breaching protection orders have been significantly increased to demonstrate a militant stance against perpetrators of domestic violence. And this is clearly articulated in the numerous messages which are part and parcel of the Ministry No Excuse for Abuse campaign. So as we celebrate progress, we acknowledge that the road ahead will bring several challenges. Today, we will define the parameters for further interrogation and refining of the Domestic Violence Act. Your timely and targeted inputs, members, will therefore be extremely pivotal, given your position as members of this committee. We are the generation of change. We have the power and a new viewpoint, and we're going to change the world. Watch us. Once change like this begins, the momentum picks up and it becomes unstoppable. I really want to thank the members for turning up this morning and to thank Ms. Janet Blackwood, our counsel from the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport, for her presence here this morning. So, matters for discussion would now center around procedural matters, members. And the first item would be to set a quorum for these meetings, these committee meetings. Minister Johnson-Smith, I don't know if you may wish to make a contribution here in relation to the quorum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is the normal quorum 3 or 4? 4? 3
plus the chair.
3. So chair plus 3. I think that would be appropriate, although I'm quite
Chair
sure that you won't be struggling for a quorum in this committee if I look at the membership rights.
Thank you. All right, so the quorum is set at 3 plus the chair. All right, now, motion for the committee to sit virtually, wholly, or part thereof. So at this time, I would ask members of the committee to indicate if they would support the motion for the committee to sit virtually, wholly, or part thereof.
Madam Chair, if a motion could be moved to permit the committee the flexibility to adopt either iteration based on the circumstances, so that we could either sit together in hybrid format or entirely virtually, depending on the circumstances. That might be the best option to allow us effectiveness.
Okay, so the motion is so moved, and I ask, yes. Thank you so much. So, motion has been moved, seconded by Member Dr. Charles, and supported by the other members. Thank you. So, members, of course, we would want to invite technical team from time to time, and so going forward, we would determine the technical teams that we would invite to sit with us. All right? So, member, if you could make comments here.
For the importance of consistency, Chair, my preference would have been for us to determine the technical support that is going to be required so that they are present through the proceedings, because oftentimes they would have to relate among each other. And if it's a case where we select per occasion, we might miss the consistency that is required. And we do depend on the technical team to relate to each other and more so agree on those technical issues. So I'm encouraging for us to just identify those technical experts that we may need to supplement the legal support that is here.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. In relation to the technical team, we know the OPC. But maybe Ms. Blackwood, you'd want to indicate to our other members that the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Bureau of Gender Affairs, the OPC, and you may want to mention other. Please go ahead and mention other technical team members that we would wish to have. You want to use your...
So I think members from the chambers would be needed, the Attorney General's chambers as well, and we could, going on, determine other persons as long as we have a base amount of persons.
So we will note, and any other technical support that we require from time to time, we can determine. Law reform, yeah. So, members, we now need to determine how we proceed from here in relation to submissions. Do we advertise? Do we put a notice? The traditional way of advertising is to put an ad in the newspaper, but I think that we have gone beyond that. We need to use social media, print, social media, radio. I always find that Parliament's communication regarding the work of committees, I don't think the reach has been wide enough and far enough for participation. And certainly in relation to domestic violence, it cuts across and it really impacts on communities across Jamaica. And so we should use the opportunity to do a proper outreach campaign for participation and submissions to be made. So I have the agreement of the member. Longmore, you want to make a comment?
Good afternoon, Chair. I was checking to see if we would be inviting perhaps certain specific groups. Yes? Like we initiate that rather than just the adverts.
Yes, we would be inviting groups, and the clerk, the committee clerk would provide us with a list that's normally a group of groups that are normally invited. We certainly could look back at the list that we used for the sexual harassment legislation and other such committees that we have that relates to domestic violence, sexual abuse, gender issues. I'd ask the clerk to provide us with that list, so the next meeting we can look at it and we can add where it's necessary. I certainly would want to include representatives from the political parties to come and make presentations as well. Yeah. Senator Motley, what do you think?
I fully support that.
Sorry.
Endorse it, Minister. It's very important, especially we have women's arms in both. And I want to also say that the young people's organizations, because this cuts across all ages, so I'd also suggest that we extend the invitation specifically to the youth arms.
Thank you, thank you. Member Johnson-Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the suggestions made, but just also wish to ask in relation to the submissions previously made. So we have referred to the list of the persons who would have made submissions to the Joint Select Committee, which considered the 4 pieces of legislation, including the Domestic Violence Act. And my question would be whether we would be pulling those submissions or whether we are going to take those as functus and move on. Are we going to revisit those because they had matured to a point? It's just that they needed to be fleshed out in terms of the amendments to be finalized. Would we revisit the report? That is, you take from the Joint Select Committee report that was approved by both Houses of Parliament, the segment on the on the Domestic Violence Act, or would we be revisiting some of the submissions? Just the report, and then ask the previous participants to re-engage? Just trying to get the thinking of the...
Senator Motley?
Minister, may I suggest that we actually re-engage them? You know, we have been evolving. The topic has been given wide consideration. And I recall the report because I joined it at the tail end. One of the things,
bruises are much worse. You have to report him. Yeah, but if I go to the police station, they're just going to see it as another man and woman fighting.
Victims of domestic abuse can get help through the Domestic Violence Intervention Centers. Let me show you how to find one of these centers. Open the browser on your smartphone and type in jcf.gov.jm. When the page loads, scroll down to Resources and click on Domestic Violence Intervention Centers. This will give you a full listing of all the centers with their contact information. Or just walk into any police station and ask them to direct you to the nearest Domestic Violence Intervention Center where you can speak to a police officer.
A message from the European Union United Nations Spotlight Initiative in partnership with the government of Jamaica.
What if they knew that you abused her? Her family?
Mr. Jones.
And your colleagues, how will they look at an abuser? When the law comes knocking, you'll have nowhere to run.
Mr. Brown, you're under arrest. Please get up, hands behind your head and interlock your fingers.
Turn your back on abusers. Report gender-based violence to the police. There's no excuse for abuse. Call the Bureau of Gender Affairs at 876-754-8577.
And then we start our regular meetings in May. I'd like your thoughts on that.
So my thoughts is for us to have that defined period to which we are receiving submissions, including setting a time frame. And during that time frame, there is a repetition of the notice as a reminder. But I also like the idea, Chair, of not just providing a notice, but providing some sort of a promotion by Parliament that would attract respondents. In terms of the sittings now, I think the next meeting would be one where we start taking submissions. Because having received the submissions, we may have one meeting that we put all those submissions together. But then as soon as possible, we start having submissions. So the groundwork would have started. That would be my considered approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Member. Member Long, well, the system works. First to put your mic on.
So, thank you, Chair. So in the context of and the nature of this subject, I think especially the persons who had contributed last time would be very sensitized and I think would be eager to probably update their submission. So I think probably we should consider, as was somewhat suggested before too, issuing the invite and seeing the response, because what my experience has shown is that sometimes you have a sparsity of submissions, or you might have a backlog almost. So perhaps we can hold the newspaper invites until we have sent out to the past persons, and in that letter of invitation, I don't know if we could coordinate to indicate to them that they, because maybe their leadership or their administrators have changed hands and may not be aware of the fact that that organization had made a submission in the past. So perhaps we can indicate that your organization had contributed, they could seek to reference it, right? And so we could kind of get an idea at what the response is, and then from there gauge regarding the adverts and when to advertise for further submissions.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Minister Johnson-Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I think the variety of responses are probably reflective of the richness of the discussions that we're going to have. Wanted to be a little more targeted in my suggestion. First, I think we should try to get the advertisements out by next week, the standard form. And the minimum should be the 2 weekends of Sunday, but because we cross Easter, maybe we make that 3, but we ensure that the social media and radio announcements also start. And that we similarly, if not next week, I mean, we're at Tuesday, so it's not unthinkable that by next week we should have this letter out to the persons, the organizations who participated before, and as indicated, stating you had participated in, your organization participated in, or you participated in the Joint Select Committees held between, whether it was 2015 and 2018, or 2013 and 2015, on the matter of the Domestic Violence Act, and accordingly, and a new Joint Select Committee has been convened to review this legislation. We would like to invite you to make submissions. Please indicate, and then we give them a period of time in that. I think the aim of the committee could be, Madam Chair, to ensure that we are able to start sitting by the 3rd week, if not the 3rd week of April, because you would have given 2 weeks. There may be some invitees who, as Dr. Longmore has pointed out, may be eager, they may be ready, and they would submit, and therefore the committee would be able to say to you, Chair, well, we have 3 submissions already, so really the committee could start to consider them, or we might have to exercise a little more flexibility in terms of time. But if we are looking down the road to say that Parliament goes on recess in August, and given that this matter is not new to us, we should really be trying to ensure that we have a report ready by the end of July so that it can be digested and then passed by the September when we return from recess, if we're not thinking too far down the road. But my sense was that there should not be a sort of relaxed approach. Some time has elapsed since the report of the committee. Some amendments have been made, but deficiencies have been identified in that process that will allow us to build more quickly than perhaps we would have initially. So I think if we try to work back from that, then it would give us, we would definitely have May and June to go through submissions and then to analyze and do a report by July, if we have that sort of vague outline. Madam Chair, for your consideration and that of the committee.
Thank you, Minister Johnson-Smith. Senator Fitzhenley, go ahead.
Afternoon to you, Madam Chair, and your members. I certainly think the final week or 3rd week of April would be a good time in terms of to consider the submissions made. I'd support the notion of, as soon as is practicable, engaging the advertisement process. And I'd encourage us to, in terms of the platforms being contemplated, to consider using as diverse as possible platforms, because I find that Jamaicans are often a unifocused people in terms of the platform which they use to get news from. Some will say, I get my news via social media alone. In fact, I saw a comment this week, a lady saying she depends on Instagram for her news. Others will only listen to 5 o'clock news. And there's another cohort which will say, I will only watch news on TV, whether at 7 or at 8 o'clock. So I'd encourage us to consider engaging as diverse as possible in terms of the platforms being considered when we engage the advertisement process, which I hope is as soon as possible.
Thank you, Senator Martley.
Chair, I was wondering if we had the wherewithal to actually share the submissions which were made in that Joint Select Committee with members. I listened to what Senator Gale said, and he pointed out that not everyone here had that sort of information available. I think it would be good preparation.
Brutality isn't a legality. There's no rationality as to why this abnormality should become a mentality. A mentality which kills and tortures. Are you really telling me you're afraid to speak up because you might be called an informer? Let us break the barrier of brutality and enforce it with alacrity. If you know someone who has been victimized, I charge you to I, interrupt their situations before their O. Oppressor continues to L, lurk in their lives. Let us E, extend our hands to our brothers and sisters who are being victimized, and N, never see violent acts and ignore them. Let us C, come together and be the E, example, so we may end a barrier on brutality.
Bruises are much worse. You have to report him. Yeah, but if I go to the police station, they're just going to see it as another man and woman fighting.
Victims of domestic abuse can get help through the Domestic Violence Intervention Centers. Let me show you how to find one of these centers. Open the browser on your smartphone and type in jcf.gov.jm. When the page loads, scroll down to Resources and click on Domestic Violence Intervention Centers. This will give you a full listing of all the centers with their contact information. Or just walk into any police station and ask them to direct you to the nearest Domestic Violence Intervention Center where you can speak to a police officer.
A message from the European Union United Nations Spotlight Initiative in partnership with the government of Jamaica.
Johnson Smith recommended make every effort to have the report ready by July. And with that in mind, we work hard to achieve that goal. So I would imagine then that we probably should meet every other week, every 2 weeks, because if we're going to work on a July deadline, then it would require us getting the submissions that were submitted previously, reviewing them, and also inviting those persons or organizations to come and make further submissions. And so we'd have to look at, say, maybe the end, maybe during the month of April. Right?
Since we are going to be competing with other committees, the space and the use of the chamber and the time of the support staff is important. So maybe Mr. Nash can start identifying some possible dates given the time, and we can establish those dates so that we have the resources available.
So would members be willing to look at us meeting how frequently? 2-week periods? And then Mr. Nash could see what dates are available. We could work with that, right?
At least to start. Chair, just a little thought. In terms of the submissions, significant work has been had, particularly by your ministry, since the last time we contemplated this. The places of safety, the helplines, and so forth. I don't know, it just occurred to me that it would be I don't know if we're able to harness input from those places in some way. I don't know if it will fall, but I think it would be the fact that we now have had those services that directly deal clinically with the circumstances that we're dealing with. I think it would be very relevant for us to get some reflection of that work that has been done, or input. I'm not sure how it falls in. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Member. I think that in reviewing submissions previously made, that it would automatically involve those organizations. For example, the Bureau of Gender Affairs would have made submissions. Jamaicans for Justice would have made submissions. Other entities would have made, and even in some cases, individuals. So once we look at the submissions made previously, the inputs would be there. The Bureau, for example, would be in a position to say what they have done so far and further recommendations, looking at how they have been able to implement or what are the challenges. We are, in fact, looking at a new piece of legislation because it's an overall review. And so, although we will be looking at previous submissions, there's still a lot of work to be done. And so we will have to open up to other presentations with a fresh look and a fresh approach. Mrs. Robinson, do you wish to make a contribution here?
Thank you very much, Minister. So I'm certainly elated that we're here, because I recall that we had many conversations and lots of submissions, very spirited and passionate appeals, and lots of content that would have been presented and would have been folded in the matrices that we had. So I heard the call for sharing of information, and I concur. That would be a nice starting point for persons, and also to bring us back for those who were a part of it, and to bring those into the loop for those who are new members. It was a lot of discussion that we had, and a lot of recommendations that were made. I did hear Senator Johnson talk about the fact that some were taken, some were not, and I think most of the ones we got were not taken, and I get the sense, based on what I've heard from the public, that they would want to see some of those that were not taken brought forward. So in order not to have a repetition of the ones that were already proposed, it would be good to get, as you've mentioned, the fresh ideas and to see what we already had. We can certainly share, Minister, the content, because we had the matrices with the analyses done. Sorry. And with the names of the places, who did what, the entities and the individuals, and what they said in terms of the submissions that they had made, the salient points that we pulled out, and certainly what we thought would have made the cut. So I do believe that that is. I can share that with persons. It's a lot of information, so beware. You'll get lots of content, okay? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mrs. Robinson. It would be useful, yes, to share that matrix and then to look at the submissions. Yeah. You wanted to make a comment, Senator?
Basically, to share the matrices, or the matrix that was utilized, and the report. We had spoken earlier about the submissions, but the matrix would have, defined everything that was presented. So we can look at, identify what was taken that would have formed the report, and look what would have been submitted that never made it to the table, as I call it.
Senator Fitzhenry?
I think Senator Longmore had made a suggestion that we directly contact some interest groups, or stakeholders, I should say, with a view of getting feedback. I am interested to know whether, and I suppose the information will be available at a later date, whether the JCF was engaged. Because I know this year the JCF made heavy weather of the fact that they have established domestic violence units across the country at approximately 10 police stations. And I'm aware that there are personnel in the constabulary force who have unique views concerning how the laws may be amended and tweaked to better address the issue of domestic violence. And this is particularly important given that the data shows that domestic violence, or incidents of domestic violence, are contributing a far greater percentage compared to former years in terms of the murder rate. So I'm thinking I support Senator Longmore in terms of direct invitations being sent to some stakeholders. I think the JCF would be one in terms of, with a view of finding out how these centers are working and how we may fine-tune the law that it may work, that it works better for Jamaicans.
Thank you, Senator. So we have a plan going forward. Have our report ready in July, that we will meet every 2 weeks, that we will look at submissions made previously, invite those presenters to come back, and we will also publicize the work of the JSC so that other persons can come and make presentations. And we will use diverse media platforms. Have I left anything out? Or essentially that's it? All right. So the clerk will come up with the list of persons to be invited, and also copies of submissions made previously. Mrs. Robinson will assist in providing us with the matrix. And the clerk will also make arrangements for us to place a notice to just signal that we have started the work. And then we put together a campaign that is affordable but effective to publicize the JSC. So, members, I think you've made your input. Anything else you would wish to say? All right, so, sure, go ahead, Minister Johnson-Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. This is just to commend you on the work that has been done and to thank you for having started this very important next phase of the work with this set target of July. I think you have a committee here that is very motivated to deliver change. And I just want to say that I know we all very much look forward to contributing to a successful Joint Select Committee that does its part in improving the peace and prosperity of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Johnson Smith. And I must say that today, out of 10 members, we have 6. Right? That's very impressive. In fact, we have 7. That's very impressive. I really thank you so much for coming. And I really look forward to an exciting series of meetings. So we have dealt with procedural matters. And at this time, I would ask if there's any other business. All right. So there's no other business. We have agreed that we will meet every 2 weeks, so the clerk will take it from there in terms of setting the date of the next meeting based on what is available here at Parliament. Right. So I really look forward to continuing this work with you. There are many who thought that the JSC would not happen or we would not meet quickly, but we were determined, we all were determined that it would happen soon. And we will continue to do our work until we have come up with an improved legislation to address domestic violence. Really thank you all so much. Ms. Blackwood, Mrs. Robinson, thank you. Members, thank you. Blessings always. So the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
What if they knew that you abused her? Her family?
Mr. Jones.
And your colleagues, how will they look at an abuser? When the law comes knocking, you'll have nowhere to run.
Mr. Brown, you're under arrest. Please get up, hands behind your head and interlock your fingers.
Turn your back on abusers. Report gender-based violence to the police. There's no excuse for abuse. Call the Bureau of Gender Affairs at 876-754-8577.
The following parenting tip is brought to you by the National Family Planning Board. Anyone can have a child and call themselves a parent. A real parent is someone who puts that child above their own selfish needs and wants.
Today, we are read from Mark 9, 2-8. After 6 days, Jesus take Peter, James, and John with him, and the 4 of them one go up on one high mountain. All of a sudden, Jesus start to change right in front of them. In clothes turned white like a light. It did well white. No bleaching of the world could have bleached them so white. Then them see Elijah and Moses come turn up in